Okay, so I think we can go ahead and get started. My name is Elizabeth Pendergrass, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Demystifying Cloud Migration Using Estimation. Before we get started, I'd like to make you all aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening to the presentation are currently on mute. So to ask a question at any point during the presentation, just use the Q&A dialog box shown on the right-hand side of the WebEx screen. Kate and Keith will field as many of these questions as they have time for at the end of the presentation. If they do not have time to answer your question, don't worry. I will save all questions that we don't get to and refer them to Kate and Keith so they can get back to you. So I'll start by introducing our presenters today. Kate Armel is QSM's Director of Testing, Training, and Technical Support. She has 20 years of experience providing technical and consultative support for software project estimation, tracking, and industry benchmarking. She is currently responsible for technical support services, quality assurance, training, documentation, and online help for the SLIM suite of tools. She is also responsible for technical writing and analysis to support product development, research, and consulting services. She oversees data collection, validation, and analysis for the QSM database and development of over 900 industry regression trends included with the SLIM suite of tools. Keith Ciacco has more than 30 years of experience working in customer service, with 23 of those years spent at QSM. As Vice President, his primary responsibilities include supporting the QSM client base with their software measurement goals, managing business development, and managing existing client relations. He has developed and directed the implementation of the sales and customer retention process within QSM and has played a leading role in increasing the size of its customer base. So without further delay, I'll let Kate and Keith get started.
Hello, quick comm check. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope to provide you with some interesting and useful information, and I look forward to your questions and comments after the presentation. I'd like to start with a quick introduction to QSM for any of you who might be attending their first presentation with us. For over 4 decades, Quantitative Software Management, or QSM, has provided industry-leading tools, services, training, and research to clients located all over the world. I'm going to cover some of the common pitfalls and risk factors for cloud migration projects, and then Keith will be showing you how SLIM suite tools can simplify, standardize, and streamline the estimation of your cloud migration projects. While preparing for today's talk, I got thinking about all the changes that I've seen over the past few decades with QSM. And one thing that kept popping into my mind was those farmers insurance commercials. I don't know if you've seen them on TV. And more importantly, maybe their tagline. We know a few things because we've seen a few things. In a rapidly changing world, it often seems like the only thing we can count on is change and how we manage it. We need to be able to plan for it, build the right amount of contingency into our plans, adapt when priorities or goals change mid-project, learn from experience once our project's complete, and apply those insights to future estimates and projects so that we get smarter as we learn. Now, hopefully the picture above doesn't remind you of your current cloud migration project, but hopefully it is a reminder that while we can't always avoid the unexpected, we can definitely plan for it. So what do we mean when we talk about cloud migration? Well, at a very high level, we're talking about the shift from the familiar paradigm of physical data centers to virtual, online, or pay-as-you-go data workload and application hosting. As we'll see, The work that's required to implement various migration strategies differs with the path that we choose. Shifts to any new technology, whether it's Agile, Cloud, DevOps, whatever the next new thing or the next flavor of the month may be, usually begin with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm and an almost single-minded focus on the anticipated gains. This enthusiasm is both important and necessary because change is hard. Getting large organizations to completely reinvent the way they do business is just about as easy as teaching my favorite animal, the elephant, to tap dance. The human tendency is towards something we call optimism bias. That's the belief that good things are more likely to happen to us than bad things. And optimism bias particularly comes into play when we expect anticipated gains to be large. It turns out to be a pretty good description for what people's expectations are with regard to cloud migration. So I thought it would be interesting to look at some public cloud adoption surveys and find out what the industry leaders are saying about their cloud migration projects. What did they expect versus what really happened? So the first thing you hear a lot about is, gosh, all our competitors are moving to the cloud and we need to be ready. We need to beat them to the punch. And that's true. Most organizations really are moving to the cloud, but they're not all there yet. The second one, and again, I was so surprised at how often I ran into this, is that migrating all of our applications to a cloud native architecture or going cloud first is the way to go. And anywhere from 38 to 40% of IT departments are feeling some pretty significant pressure to migrate 100% of their assets into the cloud. But by far the winner here is just think about all the money we'll save once we get to the cloud. About 50% of recent public cloud adoptees expected really significant cost reductions once they got to the cloud. So these are some pretty high expectations. And while we want to capture all that enthusiasm and channel it, we also want to make sure that we've got a little bit of caution built into our plans. The role of careful estimation and project planning is to identify and plan for obstacles or blockers so we don't lose momentum or even stall out entirely when we encounter them. So if we want to incorporate what could possibly go wrong here into our planning and budgeting, looking at industry data and experiences turns out to be a pretty darn good place to start. History has a way of repeating itself until enough pain has been inflicted that we have to stop and pay attention. So in looking at the bullets you're seeing before you, there are really two ways to interpret these results, and these are the results of several public cloud adoption surveys. The first one focuses on the fact that many firms are not seeing the gains they hoped for from migrating to the cloud. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that. The second one, though, focuses on how many firms are actually getting cloud migration right. And hopefully, we can also think about what things are they doing that make them different from the rest of the pack. Another common thread in the experience of early cloud adopters is that accurately estimating the cost and schedule for cloud migrations is hard. Why is it so hard? One real big factor is something we call cost complexity. We don't really understand the costs of operating in the cloud as well as we'd like to yet, and so predicting those costs can be really difficult. Knowledge of both our current costs and capabilities and the downstream demand and work that will need to be performed to get us to the end of our journey is the key to making effective decisions here. So there are three big types of costs that you'll be thinking about during a cloud migration project. And hopefully all of these are visible and important to you and you're planning for all three of them. How much you focus on any one probably depends on your position in your firm's architecture or hierarchy. If you're up at the enterprise level, hopefully you're thinking about all three of these. But if you're a project manager and you really are only tasked with overseeing the migration of a particular project or application to the cloud, you may only be concerned with those cloud migration projects for that one part of the puzzle piece. But I would argue that even if you're down at this level where you're only estimating a single project, you need some visibility into the first two types of costs because cloud migration is interconnected and cost overruns and delays in one part of the process can easily affect your part of the piece. So let's look at these costs. The first one is you really need to understand your current application and infrastructure costs and the performance that you're getting out of your current environment. Now, why is this even important? I mean, you're moving to the cloud. That's all in the past. You don't need to worry about it. Well, it turns out a fair number of public cloud adopters didn't worry quite enough about this piece. It turns out knowing your current costs of doing business is a pretty important input into vendor pricing calculators. So when you're shopping for a cloud provider, you need to be able to estimate the capacity you're going to need in the cloud. And you can't really do that very effectively if you don't know what you're spending now. This is an often underestimated piece with lots of hidden and indirect costs like software licenses, labor, and even things like indirect costs like lost revenue from outages and maintenance downtime. If you've got a lot of those in your current environment, capturing that cost can help you make the case for migrating to the cloud. The second piece is the actual price of the cloud infrastructure. Once you get to the cloud, what's it going to cost to run and stay there? Again, we have vendor pricing calculators, but they're not necessarily going to include everything you need to count. One missing piece a lot of companies miss is the staff and the skills that are going to be needed to operate in the cloud and, more importantly, for governance of the cloud environment. Now, why do we care about this? A sort of intuitive or easy to understand parallel is between your cloud bill and your cable TV bill. If you're like most of us, you're probably paying way too much for cable TV, but you subscribed at some level that was based on your estimated usage, and now you're paying for 800 channels, but in reality, you're only using 5. And the final piece is your cloud migration costs for individual projects. So here, picking the most effective and efficient migration path to the cloud is going to be important. You don't want to pay for something that's twice what you need. You need to factor in things like dependencies. So if you're going to leave part of your data behind because you're not migrating to the cloud all at once, how is that going to impact performance? What about other applications that interact with the application you're moving up to the cloud? So we've got some estimation challenges. On the one hand, once you get started, maintaining your momentum and not letting obstacles stop or even stall you out is a critical success factor. But on the other hand, a lot of firms report that they needed to spend far more time on application discovery, on planning, and on prioritizing workloads that they were going to shift to the cloud. This is what enables accurate cost forecasts and lets you secure the skills that you need when they're needed. This is a place where having robust estimation tools and processes and sound risk management practices can help you stay ahead of the skills gap. So again, you're going to need some skills, odds are, that you don't currently have in-house once you move to the cloud. Because some of those skills are very new, they may not be all that easy to secure in a tight labor market. If you have the ability to produce estimates broken out by skill or role over time, that gives you some crucial information that you can export to PPM tools, or it may allow you to decide, well, maybe we're going to take some of our in-house staff and we're going to retrain them from their current skills to get those skills that we need in the future. But what you need to empower those kinds of decisions is some advance notice. You want to be able to evaluate and select the right migration path for your organization, and we're going to talk about that more in just a moment. You want to be able to prioritize workloads for migration. So if you're starting off on your project, normally what you'd like to do is you want to build support. And so you'd like to have some quick wins where you can demonstrate a really powerful cost savings or efficiency savings so that you can build support for the rest of your migration effort. You don't want to start and have your first project be a disaster. And finally, we talked about change earlier. We know change is going to happen. When it does happen, you need to be able to reevaluate and reprioritize your work and your planning to stay ahead of the learning curve. This is what I like to call the complicated slide, but it really boils down to understanding, are your migration decisions going to be driven by policy? So has your management said, we're all in, we're going to the cloud, we're going to rewrite everything? Or are they going to be more what we might call cloud smart, where your decisions are being driven by looking at your portfolio and estimating the value relative to your current cost of ownership of migrating data and applications to the cloud? There's a big difference between these two, and there's no really right answer. When we're looking at cloud migration paths, they start with fairly simple ones that are fairly low complexity, low amount of work. And as you move down this hierarchy, you're going to find that the complexity, the work, and the cost are all going to increase. And unsurprisingly, the risk will increase as well. Most cloud experts have either 5 or 6 R's, and their names differ slightly. So, you might start off with retiring and retaining for your non-migration paths. You may decide that you have older applications that you're really not getting that much value out of anymore, and there's no real benefit to migrating to the cloud. So you're not going to want to spend that money. You may just go ahead and phase these out. You may identify applications that aren't costing that much really to run in their current environment. Therefore, you're really not going to gain that much from going to the cloud. And maybe they're not architected for the cloud, so they're not really placed to take advantage of the scalability and flexibility that the cloud offers to you. Once you decide and identify good candidates for moving to the cloud, you have several options. One of them is just to simply replace it with a commercial or software as a service package that resides in the cloud. This is very, very similar and familiar territory for software estimators because it's package implementation hosted in the cloud. And it can range all the way from fairly simple, if you're just going to migrate your data into it with very few customizations, all the way up to very complex if you need a bunch of custom business rules and reports and add-ons. So a good estimate is going to be very important in helping you decide whether this is the right option for your company. There's also the rehost or what we call lift and shift or lift, tinker, and shift. And this is where you're just going to take your applications, move them into the cloud with few or no modifications. This is a good way to get some quick wins. So we talked about how that's important at the beginning of a project. And finally, there's sort of the Cadillac option, which is to rewrite or re-architect your applications so that they can take advantage of all the flexibility and scalability that the cloud offers. So how do you know which one of these options is right for you? This is where aligning your cloud migration strategy with your overall business goals and expectations is essential. Stephen Orban, the general manager for Amazon Web Services Data Exchange and the author of the book Ahead in the Cloud, provides two stories of two different companies that started off with the same idea but took very different paths. The story actually has a happy ending because everything worked out for them. The first story is about a company called Netflix. They took 7 years to migrate everything in their portfolio to the cloud and re-architect it on the way. This decision was driven by an outage that occurred in 2008 where they had some database corruption that basically took them out of business for 3 days. They were unable to ship any movies to their customers for 3 days. And so this gave them a pretty powerful incentive to identify and eliminate single points of failure. Even though this was an intensive investment that cost them more than they anticipated and took longer than they thought it would, it turned out to be the perfect thing for them to do because when streaming came along, because they were already in the cloud, they were perfectly placed to take advantage of it. And in fact, it powers their business model. The second example comes actually from Stephen Orban himself from several years ago when he was CIO of a company called Dow Jones. Like Netflix, they started off cloud first. They were all in and they were going to go to the cloud, and then something happened. They had a sudden crisis and they were notified that they had a short period of time to migrate all of their applications out of one of their data centers. And so quickly, they had to pivot from planning to re-architect everything in their portfolio to taking a significant piece of it and rehosting it or lifting and shifting it to the cloud. Now, the irony here is that initially this was viewed as a big setback or failure, but it came to be viewed for as an unplanned for success. Why? One of the big surprises, and it was a happy surprise, is they realized an immediate cost savings of almost 30% over hosting their applications locally. But there were other advantages. It was a faster and lower cost alternative for them to get into the cloud quickly. And once they were there, they found out that it was actually easier to re-architect or rewrite their applications once they were already in the cloud. So, you've got an entire portfolio of applications, data, and infrastructure, your so-called digital estate. You've got 1,000 decisions to make. All of them require good data and a solid understanding of your business goals, your current capabilities, and your resources. This is where good estimation tools can be a real force multiplier for you. You need the ability to make timely, repeatable estimates that provide what I call small a agility. So I'm not saying here that you're going to use Agile methodology for your development, but we mean Agile in the old sense of being able to quickly pivot from one set of plans to another. And that requires the ability to quickly create and revise estimates when things change. You don't have time for estimates that take 2 weeks to create and maybe another week to redo. You need the ability to quickly compare and create multiple scenarios so that you can choose the most effective, efficient migration path. You need a framework that allows you to templatize your non-development costs. Those are those hidden or frequently missed costs. and produce complex estimates that make sense up at the enterprise level. You need the ability to anticipate your future resource demands. So those are those new skill sets that you don't currently have, that you're either going to have to go out into the marketplace and secure ahead of time, or retrain current staff to fill those slots. And finally, you need a way to ground your estimates in proven performance, whether that comes from industry benchmarks or hopefully as you're going along and you're completing your cloud migration projects, you're collecting up some history and feeding that into your new estimates. So again, different migration paths imply different work or different activities. And as we just saw, not all cloud migrations actually result in modifications to the application or actual migrations to the cloud. As Keith is going to show you shortly, the QSM model maps lower level activities that are common to software development, hardware, and infrastructure projects to 4 high-level lifecycle phases, and this gives you a lot of flexibility. So what we're looking at here is a diagram from AWS that shows the different migration paths. And regardless of which path you choose, you're going to begin by looking at your portfolio. You're going to assess different applications or data sources for cloud readiness, and hopefully you're going to prioritize them according to how much bang for the buck you're going to get for migrating them to the cloud. Now, because we have a flexible lifecycle model, you can include or exclude this phase from your estimate. At some point, you're going to determine the appropriate migration path. Now, often, if you have an estimation tool that lets you produce quick estimates, you might want to do estimates for several migration paths here and then compare them. Or you might decide you're not going to move to the cloud at all. What you're seeing in this blue outline here are the activities that occur during the actual migration itself. And while the activities are slightly different, depending on the path that you choose, the model is flexible enough to accommodate all of them. As Keith's going to show you, you can create templates that accommodate a variety of life cycles, staffing strategies, skill sets, and sizing techniques that match your migration strategy and the way your development teams think about the work that they need to perform. Building all of this into your templates can help you because it helps you to standardize your estimates, and that's important for communicating across the enterprise. It can help you shorten the estimation learning curve because you're following a process. It can speed up new estimation creation and revisions when things change. So to summarize, firms migrating to the cloud are often doing it because they're hoping for some pretty big cost savings. Unfortunately, as we saw in our cloud adoption surveys, they don't always realize the hoped for gains. The difference between succeeding and ending up disappointed lies in careful upfront estimation and planning, in identifying all your costs and making sure that you have a sound basis for your benchmarking and your estimation activities. The ability to produce fast, timely, and repeatable estimates is what is going to arm you with the data that you need to identify and overcome obstacles and plan for success instead of disappointment. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'm going to turn everything over to Keith, who will show you how robust estimation tools can help out during your cloud migration journey. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kate. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. My name is Keith Ciacco, and so my role in this is going to be to show some examples of how to estimate different types of cloud migration projects, as well as to show some ways that we can help manage some of those expectations that Kate was talking about in her slide presentation. So what I thought I'd do is just kind of start with the big picture, and I'll give you a little background on the QSM tools really quickly here, and then I'll actually get into showing you some examples. And then hopefully we'll leave a few minutes at the end for questions as well. So if I go down on the map here, we've got you can see the tools that we're going to talk about today. So really, SLIM is really a suite of tools, and SLIM stands for Software Lifecycle Management. So it's really a suite of estimating and metrics tools. I'll give you a brief overview of each one before I actually get into some of the details here. SLIM Data Manager is where you would go ahead and capture your historical data on all of your cloud migrations and really any type of software engineering project. So we support all different types of software, but today we're going to focus on cloud migrations. So Data Manager gives us a repository, a place to capture all of that historical data once the projects are completed. SLIM Metrics gives us the ability to analyze the data, post-project analysis, process improvement, return on investment types of analytics and analysis. SLIM Estimate is probably where we're going to spend most of our time today. That's the model and tool that's going to give us the ability to figure out, what should this cloud migration project cost and how long should it take? And it's also going to give us the ability to manage risk and look at all the different trade-offs that we have in the scenarios that we're going to be looking at today. SLIM Control is for project oversight and tracking, so it actually lets us re-estimate when things change in the middle of the project. And then SLIM Master Plan gives us the ability to manage our portfolio. So if we have a group of projects, or maybe we want to know what we're going to spend next year, we want to estimate all of that, Master Plan gives us the ability to look at the big picture. So let's start with the Data Manager first. So this is a best practice that we always recommend. If you can, what we recommend is try to pull some historical data together on your cloud migration projects. And of course, if you don't have any historical data and you're doing this for the first time, that's okay too. QSM has a really large industry database, one of the largest of its kind, and we include the statistical averages and trends from that industry database in the SLIM tools. So you can really lean on that early on when you're running your first estimates. But if you can, what we encourage is to try to pull together some of your own historical data as you get going here. So this would be an example of the kind of information that we like to focus on. So here we've got a cloud migration project. You can see there's multiple tabs here, right? So we can get as detailed as we want. We can create custom metrics. We can go as detailed on the sizing and the quality as we would like. But the basic information tab is really probably the most important. What we'd like to do is capture, once a project's completed, a cloud migration project, how much work was delivered. And you can see here, we're using stories as a sizing measure, but you can use, it's flexible. We can use whatever we want, whatever we can consistently get a handle on. And then we want to also be able to bring in, or capture how long the project took and how much effort was spent. Once we get those three measures, we can calculate what we call a productivity index, or a PI, as you can see here. The productivity index is a measure of efficiency. It's going to encapsulate the overall project environment. It's going to take into account things like the complexity of the work that you're doing, the experience level of the people, the tools and methods you might be using. So it's going to calculate, it's going to be mathematically calculated, but it's going to be taking into account your overall project environment. So once we get those three metrics in here, how much the scope or how much work was delivered and the duration and the effort, we can calculate your productivity index. Now keep that in mind because that's going to become important later on in the demo. Now we can leverage all that history here in the estimating tool, and that's what we're showing right here. This is SLIM Estimate. And Kate mentioned managing expectations and risk and being able to look at different scenarios quickly so we can make the right decision. So I'm going to show you some examples of how we can support all that using these estimating tools and models. And I say models because SLIM is based on empirical models, historical data, and analytics. Okay, so we're going to leverage work that maybe you've done in the past, or we're going to leverage industry data. And then we're going to be able to help manage the uncertainty that often comes with early planning. I'm going to show you the big picture first. You can see I've got a navigator to my left that gives me multiple views that describes an estimate that I've already run. And in the first view here, you can see that we're looking at a staffing profile. We're actually looking at a cloud migration project using an Agile methodology. And then you can see that, this first view here, we've got a staffing view that gives us sort of a box shape, and it tells us that we're going to deliver this project in about 16 sprints. And if I look below the chart there, you can see a little summary of the estimate saying that we're going to deliver this cloud migration project in about 7.5 months, and we're going to spend about $1.9 million, and we're going to use about 9 people on the project. So it gives us a little summary. If I look to the right, you can see some of that historical data that I showed you in the data manager. So if I went up here to the history button, I can load that history in, and then it shows up here. And these triangles represent projects that hypothetically you would have in that data manager, cloud projects that you've delivered in the past. Or if you're working with a vendor, maybe you have historical data on work that the vendor has delivered for you in the past. That way, when they generate another bid for you and they give you a proposal to cost out the next piece of work, you'll have some data from previous work so you can compare and you can sanity check to make sure that their new bid is realistic. So the triangles would be your historical projects, and then the trend line is from the QSM database. It's the industry average for the type of project you're working on. And then you can see on the scatter plot here, we've got a blue data point, which represents our estimate. Okay, so right off the bat, even before I do any detailed planning, I can see if this estimate is reasonable or not. So if I'm doing an in-house project or if I'm doing a vendor project, I can see right off the bat. So if that vendor bid's coming out down here, this is duration on the vertical, but this could say cost or effort or reliability or whatever metrics that I'm focused on. You can see right off the bat, if the bid is coming out down here, you can see that it wouldn't be realistic because it's not consistent with the work that we've done in the past. Okay, so we can see these scatter plots very early in the planning process, even before we do a detailed bottom-up type of plan. So we're looking at the big picture first to avoid going down the wrong path. So these views actually describe an estimate that I've already run. You can see the summary here. You can see the scatter plot, the staffing profile. And then to my left, I've got a control panel that's going to give me the ability to look at different trade-offs. Kate had mentioned, the importance of making reliable, quick decisions, looking at all the scenarios so we go down the right path. This type of analysis here with this control panel is going to allow us to do that. So we're going to be able to look at, what would it cost if we added people, or what would it cost if we reduced the amount of work, or what if we added more work, things like that. And I'm going to show you some examples as we get deeper into the demo here. Okay, but this is the big picture, and this is one template that represents an Agile type of cloud migration. Now you can tailor these models based on the type of project you're working on. So this would be more of a traditional type of profile or template. Kate had mentioned in her slides that one of the big focuses in cloud migrations is that discovery phase. So I could actually set my template up to represent and estimate the time and the effort for that particular discovery phase while we're making decisions and looking at alternatives and things like that. So that front end could be here, and then you can see kind of the gradual adding on of people and tapering off. This is more of a waterfall or traditional type of scenario. And then Kate had mentioned in her slides about being able to not only look at, is it, the overall big picture, but how much are we going to spend by role, by month, so that we can work a little bit more efficiently in our PPM types of tools. And these, the estimating models do that as well. So here you can see, not only are we figuring out, is it going to be 3 months or 6 months? Do we need 5 people or 10 people? But it's also going to figure out, how many people are we going to need by role. So here you can see the support and the documentation and the QA folks and the testing and the programmers. You can see how many people we're going to, or this is actually the effort by role by month. And then we've also got the staffing charts as well, and these all toggle to reports, and I can bring these out into Excel and that sort of thing. So, but we're looking at this early before we really go very far. Very early planning here. We're able to see, what the estimates are by role by month, and also at the big picture level. So, again, we're looking at the output of an estimate that I've already run. Let's go ahead and take a look at, how do we start an estimate on cloud migrations? Well, that's going to be based on the type of information I have available. So let's look at the first example here. So we're going to open up solution assumptions, and then we're going to put in what our start date is, and then we're going to be able to determine how we want to allocate our resources on this particular cloud migration. You can see here, remember I showed you, this is a staffing profile, and this is actually, the staffing profile here is, you can see a box shape, and it's actually an Agile type of Scrum example where we have the same amount of people going from start to finish, right? So I can determine all that here. I can tailor this based on my project environment. And then I'm going to tell Slim how much work I need to deliver. And this is actually one of the ways that we can differentiate the different types of cloud projects that Kate had mentioned. This is where I'm going to actually define the work that I have to deliver to be successful going forward. So you can see here, we've got multiple examples here. The first one is the one that Kate mentioned, or actually Kate mentioned all of these in her slide presentation. Let's look at the first one. It's the redevelop or the rewrite where we're doing most of the work. And you can see compared to a lift and shift where we're just moving to a different platform, here we're going to rewrite the whole system. And you can see in this example how we're defining the work. And we're using Agile sizing examples here. For example, this particular one, we're looking at number of features and epics and stories, and we're breaking them out by different levels of complexity. So here, for example, I've got 20 small features. And then in the center column, you can see that I'm actually measuring the complexity. I'm actually specifying that, that large features are much more complex than the small features. We're using we can use industry normalization or gearing factors here, or we can use our own historical data to determine these. And this is basically saying that a small feature has 350 implementation units, whereas a large feature is 2,700 implementation units, right? So we can set this up based on our own project environment. But what we're doing here is we're actually defining the work that we have to deliver for this particular cloud migration. Now, Kate had also mentioned some additional examples. So let's take a look at the lift and shift example. And as you can see here, lift and shift, just moving to a different platform is going to take much less work than a total refactor or rewrite of a system. And you can see here, instead of features and epics and stories, we're actually looking at modifications and configurations and things like that. So moving to a different platform is one option to take a look at. And so the Slim tools will give you the ability to look at the cost differences between the two methods. And again, we're defining the work here. And Kate had also mentioned buying a package, right? So here we're calling it drop and shop or repurchase. And you can see here how we're defining the scope. We're actually using RICE-F objects. We're looking at number of reports and interfaces and conversions and things like that. So this is really important because what we're going to want to do is have a consistent way of defining the scope, and it's going to be different depending on the type of cloud migration that we're moving forward with. Now, another way to differentiate the type of cloud migration is using this productivity index. Remember, I showed you in the data manager that it's calculated, once the projects are completed, we can actually calculate what your productivity is on those completed projects. And then we're going to leverage that when we do our next project, when we do our future estimates. So here I'm actually inputting a productivity index. I can calculate that from my history, or I can use the QSM industry database as well. And you can see that we can actually answer questions about our project environment to determine what our productivity is. And then we can compare ourselves to other folks. And when you're working with vendors and a vendor proposes to do a cloud migration for you and they tell you, well, it's going to cost this amount of money and it's going to take this long in duration, you're going to be able to calculate. It's going to be automatic. Their productivity index is going to populate into the Slim tool. So you're going to be able to see if that productivity index is competitive in the industry, and if their cost and schedule is competitive, and if it's realistic or not. So we're going to go ahead and put in the amount of work that needs to be done. We'll move forward with the rewrite here in this example, and then the productivity index. And I can tell Slim if I'm not really sure about these inputs. So we're actually using a range approach here. Same with the sizing. right? You can see the range here. And this is one of the ways that we can manage that early uncertainty that comes with early planning and forecasting. We can tell, how, if we're comfortable with the inputs that we're using. We're going to put in a labor rate, and this is one number that encompasses the overall macro labor rate for the overall project. If I want to, I can actually go to another area of the tool and break that out into much more detail, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. And then I'm going to make a decision. Do I want to do an estimate based on the trends, the industry, or do I have a specific target that I'm working with? For example, I need to get this project done, this cloud migration done within 8 months, or maybe I have multiple constraints. I need to get done in a certain amount of time, within a certain effort, with a certain number of people, and within a certain reliability. And as you can see, I've got this whole detailed area here where I can really be specific to my project environment. I can come in and actually specify, the percentages, based on those skill allocations. So that when it breaks out the overall estimate, it breaks out the cost for developers and testers. It'll use the percentages that I've achieved in the past. Or I can use these templates that are already built for us that are already built in Slim. In fact, let me show you a little bit more detailed view. So we can actually get really detailed here and break out all these different roles by percentage so that when it figures out the project's going to be 6 months with a certain number of people, it'll also use these percentages to break out the cost and effort numbers by role by month. And then you can use that information when you're working with your PPM tools like Kate had mentioned in her slide presentation. So that's kind of a detailed approach. But what happens if we don't have a lot of information going in? Maybe I'm not able to define the scope, like I just showed in that example. Well, we can start at a much higher level or a more macro level early on. And oftentimes what we find is, when we're embarking on these cloud projects, we don't have a lot of detailed information. Or maybe we're working with several vendors and I'm looking at multiple bids and I don't have a lot of information on that vendor. So what we might do is use some of these other approaches that are built in here. And let's go ahead and start with a ROM estimate. Rough order of magnitude would be one approach. And I can go ahead and say, okay, I don't have a lot of information. So we're going to go ahead and say, okay, what's the name of the project? We'll import that in, cloud migration, Agile template. We're going to put in a start date. And then I'm going to say, okay, what kind of project is it? And then I'm going to choose a knowledge base or these sets of trends. And when I click on these, what happens is it brings in the typical cost and schedule and effort numbers for this type of project. And then we're going to leverage that going forward in the estimate. I can even create, in fact, you can see here, I can even create custom trend lines based on my own cloud projects and things like that. And then I'm going to tell Slim, is this a big project or a small project? So I'm actually going to use a t-shirt sizing approach here in this example. And this is tuned to the industry data. So when I say big, small, or medium, it's going to use an industry average, but I can also tailor this based on my own historical data. So when I say small or big, it's going to be, user defined based on my project environment. And then I'm going to put in that productivity index based on either the industry data or maybe my own cloud projects. Now that's one approach. That's one approach. Let's show another example here. Let's figure that I'm working in an Agile environment and maybe I have a fixed cost or a fixed schedule or that type of scenario. So we'll open up this time box example. We'll put in the name of the project again, the start date. Again, I'm going to leverage the industry data. And then, I'm going to use that productivity index. And then I'm going to tell Slim what the cost and the schedule are that are fixed, or maybe I have a vendor bid and they're telling me they're going to get done in 7 months with 9 people, or maybe they're telling me how much it's going to cost, right? Or if I'm doing an Agile project, maybe they're saying, oh, well, I have a fixed cost. So what we want to do is use Slim to validate whether those fixed parameters are realistic, and we also want to use Slim to figure out the scope. How much work can I actually get done within those parameters? How much work on that cloud migration, whether it's a lift and shift or re-platform, or a total rewrite or a repurchase, how much work can I get done within those fixed parameters? And then when I hit finish, it runs the model and it generates the estimates for me within a few seconds there. And it brings me back here. It gives me the summary of the estimate, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. It lets me see if the estimate's realistic. And then it gives me the ability to look at different trade-offs. So for example, it's telling me here it's going to take 16 sprints to deliver within 7.5 months. well, what if I need to get done in 6 months? Is that possible? And I can say, okay, great. How much, will it help me to add that extra Scrum team in? What if I add people? Will it help? And a lot of times, we actually get a diminishing returns when we add a lot of people. When I hit OK, it runs the estimate. Kate had mentioned in her presentation, the ability to look at trade-offs quickly to make the right decision. Should we go lift and shift? Should we go, total rewrite? So, here I'm looking at a bigger team size, and I can see the estimate. How, I'm saving a little bit of time, but it's going to cost me a lot more money, right? So that's a scenario that I want to take a look at. Or, what would it cost, if, once I add all that work from the backlog, how much more will that cost and how long will it take? And then within a couple seconds, I can look at that trade-off. So you can see here, it's going to take a few more sprints to deliver, and it's going to cost me more money once I start incorporating that backlog. Once I generate these estimates, it'll also break out the charts in detail here. Here it's showing me the cost per sprint, how many stories per sprint, or how many implementation units per sprint. It's going to show me the velocity. It's going to let me see if the estimate is realistic, if it's consistent with industry. And then once I generate this release level, project level estimate, I'm going to want to eventually see what my portfolio is going to cost. And here you can see, and I know I'm running out of time, you can see that I've got all of my cloud projects broken out by different groups. And you can see the gray bar there actually shows me the overall cost for that particular division within my company. The blue bar actually shows me how much each release or task is going to cost. And I can look at the risk at the portfolio level. So for example, here are all my cloud projects within my portfolio. And you can see the green box there. We can see where we want to be based on historical data, and we can see some of our project estimates are hanging out here a little bit. We actually estimated these too aggressively. We assumed too high of a productivity, therefore a shorter schedule. And then down here, we've got the ones that weren't estimated aggressively enough, or we assumed too low of a productivity. So we want to look at the big picture, because maybe each cloud migration looked okay by itself, but when we compare it to our portfolio, we can see that some of them are a little bit risky. And then we can look at, Kate had mentioned managing that demand with capacity. And we can see here that, we can look at the overall portfolio, effort by role by month, staffing. And here we're looking at the total staffing. You can see, and these are color coded. We've got developers in purple. So you can see when we're ramping up total people, you can see we've got a total of 200 people here that we're going to need to get the work done. And then, if we only have 150 on staff, that's a red flag, right? So the demand is too high, so we have to kind of reevaluate and make changes. And this is all early in the process before we spend a lot of money, so that we can avoid going down the wrong path. So I'm going to go ahead and end it there, because I wanted to leave enough time for questions. So I will go ahead and hand back to Elizabeth and bring Kate in again.
Thanks, Keith. So I think we can go over to Q&A now. One question I know we had, and this is for Kate, is what were the references for your cloud statistics? I think they were.
Thank you. I was on mute. I was talking to myself. I do have a resources and references slide at the end of my presentation, and we will make those slides available to you. And additionally, if you'd like to email me, I'm more than happy to provide you with anything I used. There is a lot of great information out there, and I would be absolutely thrilled to share it with you.
Thank you. Another question is, are there trend groups for the cloud migration flavors now?
There are not right now, and this has been a really hot topic of conversation within QSM. We mentioned having been in business for 40 years, and the reason I mention that is that you see a lot of things come and go. And in getting projects into the database, a couple of things have to happen before they get into our database. They have to have time to execute. The data has to be compiled and collected, and then we have to have somebody volunteer to give it to us. And we've been very fortunate in that regard. We talked about doing dedicated cloud trends, and we are looking at that right now and seeing how much data we have. One of the sort of complicating factors, if you remember that, what are we talking about when we talk about cloud migration, was that there's different kinds of cloud migration. So we really have to decide, do we want to lump it all into a set of trends where we've got lift and shift projects that have one sort of set of characteristics in there with application rewrites, which actually really resemble traditional software development more than they do anything else? And really the only way to get good feel for that is to actually collect the data. So we do have some projects in our database that are cloud projects. The good news is I've looked at them against our existing trend lines, and they're actually quite consistent. I was pleasantly surprised. So no, we don't have cloud trends yet. Yes, we are thinking about whether we're going to have them in the future, and if so, how do we break them out into relevant subsets that would be useful to you? Good question.
Yeah, let me add to that, Elizabeth. The beauty of the SLIM tools is that we can actually create custom trend lines for you specifically, right, Kate? So customer comes in, they have their own cloud projects. We'll actually help them set up a template and create custom trends.
Absolutely.
Specifically to them. Yep.
And that's really the best practice, because industry data is incredibly helpful when you're starting off and you don't know what your own capability is. But if you're able to collect historical data and feed it back into your estimation and benchmarking process, that's when you really get the payoffs, because you can see whether you're improving over time and you can base your estimates on your current capability as it changes, because it's sort of a moving target.
Yeah, not only that, I didn't have time to show the whole, some of the stuff I wanted to show, but there's the capability to do a lot of risk mitigation within SLIM as well. So for example, we could look at the 50% estimate with a certain set of trends, and then we can run the model, and we can look at a 90% solution, you know, based on maybe the business trend, and then also based on your own custom trend line as well. So we can look at a 50% estimate, compare it to a 90% estimate. So the SLIM models actually allow for building in some buffer when we're trying to do those early plans. Even if we don't have exact information or the customer doesn't, we can still work with what they have. Yep.
Okay. And just to make everybody aware, because I know I've gotten a number of questions about this, we will make the slides available. Those will be available for download, and there will be a replay available as well. So I will send a link to that early next week. So just keep your eyes out on your email and you'll get a link to that. Next question, is the software available for a trial version?
The answer to that would be absolutely yes. Yep, send us an email or give us a call, and we do have pilot programs, and they include support and training. So definitely yes to that.
What are good criteria or tools for discover, assess, prioritize applications?
Kate, do you want to take that one?
I can take it, and I will admit up front that I am not an expert on cloud estimation in that sense. You know, I have a pretty good handle on how our tools handle these sort of things. There's a lot of good tools out there. I ran into a couple when I was doing my research for this presentation. I don't have personal experience, however, with those tools, but I'm happy to talk to anybody about it. More than happy to share whatever we know, because typically that's how we find out more about new technologies as they're coming in.
So that one you can just follow up with Kate or
Sure.
with Keith. Do data outputs from the tool integrate to other tools? For example, can you tie estimates into Azure DevOps for schedule and cost visibility?
So, Kate, do you want to try that, or do you want me to answer it?
That might be a better one for you. I mean, if there are technical aspects, I'm happy to address those.
So the answer is absolutely yes. Our tools integrate with other types of project management tools, a lot of them. We also integrate with, like Microsoft Excel, which a lot of the tools out there integrate with as well. We'd have to do a little research on the particular one you just asked about. So happy to take that one offline about, I think Elizabeth mentioned Azure. I'd have to take a look and see, but I mean, Slim in general, we have a very robust API built into Slim. So we don't usually have any issues integrating with other types of project management tools. But specifics, we'd have to check on that one. Offline would be great if you want to reach out to us.
So we'll probably just have time for a couple more questions, but I know there's a bunch that we didn't get to, and I'm going to direct those to Kate and to Keith to follow up with you guys directly. And feel free to email us. There's also our general email is info@qsm.com. So again, feel free to follow up with any questions now or later. And I will get the replay and the slides to you. But we'll take a couple more questions before we end. How would we reflect the use of migration tool-assisted code rewrite?
So
go ahead, Kate. Yeah.
I'm going to give this one a try, but first I need to make sure I understand what you're talking about. So is this, you're saying you have tools that are generating code for you and you want to factor that into your estimate? If that's the case, then what a lot of our clients will do is we try to count the inputs, because what we're really trying to capture when we're measuring work, it's a proxy. When we measure size, it's a proxy for the work. It's the elementary steps that you have to perform to get from a bright idea that somebody has to functioning software on the back end. And so what we're really trying to capture is what are the steps at the smallest possible level that get you from point A to point B. So the inputs to a lot of these tools, in a lot of cases, are going to be a better proxy for the work than the actual code that gets generated on the back end. That said, sometimes you can use generated code and apply some ratios to try to get back to what the actual work was. Or you can just realize that you're going to get higher productivity indexes because the volume of the work that you're capturing in that form is larger. So you're going to get a higher productivity index. And as long as you use it consistently going forward, that will all be sort of packaged in.
Okay, I think we'll just end with that because it seems like we have already gone a little bit over our 2 o'clock time slot. But I really appreciate Kate and Keith, you taking the time to present this today. We had a lot of great questions from all of you, and please continue to send them to us if there's anything else you want to know about. And once again, I'll send a link with the slides and the presentation early next week. And stay tuned because we will have future webinars from QSM.